Welcome back. We're nearly there. You're doing well. Just as you're coming in, this is an opportunity for you guys. If you're way up the back and you want to move forward, feel free to do that in the next couple of minutes. We're going to try and, once again, we're going to attempt to do the biggest stage selfie at the end of today. Some of you will remember it from last year. It was amazing. I did get in trouble after a bit of my wording, so I've rethought that for this year. That's exciting. But if you want to be in it, you're going to need to be down the front, and we're going to try and make it look as packed as we can in this front zone. So feel free to move. And the second thing that I just want to acknowledge again, I know I talked about it a little bit earlier today, is that Caffeine, which is the news, stories and community hub specifically for the startup industry, went live today. This is exciting. Woo! I love a go live day on a tech summit day. It all makes sense. So do go and check them out. It's caffeinedaily.co and go and see what they're all about. They went live today. Let's support them. If you've got news and stories and want to be part of that community, get on in there and support them. All right. Final thanks to our last big gold sponsor. You've done well all day. I love it. And it is Christchurch NZ. So this is your city's sustainable economic development and profile agency. Their purpose is to stimulate sustainable economic growth for a more prosperous Christchurch. I was down here on holiday in the last school holidays with my son. We had 5 days just doing all the amazing things that you've got to do here. And I talked to lots of locals and they were like, oh, I didn't even know we had that. And I'm like, it's one of those things when tourists come to your city and they do all this cool stuff, but as locals we often don't do it. So we had a great time. I tagged in Christchurch NZ on my Facebook post, old school socials. But thank you for all of your support for Canterbury Tech and just the work that you guys are doing in this city. It is certainly a great place to come and visit, and I love it when I come here. We've got a little short video for you.
Welcome to Otatahi, Christchurch. Tech is one of Otatahi's fastest growing sectors, and Christchurch NZ helps businesses to grow, connect and thrive.
Proud people, we're proud of you too. Thank you, Christchurch NZ. All right, things are about to get a little bit weird. In a good way. I love that. Someone wooed that. Did you know that your weirdness is your superpower? Who knew that? It's not a rhetorical question anymore. I'm done with those. Who knows that weirdness is their superpower? Yes, not enough of you. Well, our next speaker does. And it's a pleasure to introduce our closing keynote to finish things off today after what has been a pretty fabulous day. And that person is the wonderfully weird Vaughan Fergusson. Vaughan Fergusson was the founder of Vend, which sold, I thought this was a typo when I read my notes, which sold for 500 million. It's not a typo. In 2021. He is also the founder of the Pam Fergusson Charitable Trust, which is working with kids and educators across New Zealand, empowering them to become future innovators. So he's doing some great work, and we need Vaughan in the world. He has been involved with the High Tech Awards as a trustee and vice chair. He's been head judge for the Entrepreneur of the Year Award and mentor for innovation programs for AUT and the University of Auckland. Here to talk about the weird path to success and what we can do to embrace it to help others. Get ready to be convinced to embrace your own weirdness and give last rapturous applause and welcome Vaughan Fergusson to the stage.
Hello. G'day. How's it going? That's good. You're still awake? I heard that some of these chairs have a reclining function. Have you discovered it yet? Good. I'm a little bit weird, or 100% weird. I think we're all a bit weird, or 100% weird. And I think there's... have you noticed teenagers recently? Who's got kids? Who's got teenagers? Who's got teenagers there in that zone where they're putting their fingers in car cigarette lighters? I mean, I think there's a direct relationship between youth and weirdness. It goes like this, right? You know, you're really fucking weird. It's all like, ooh, I wonder. It's a, ooh, fuck, shit, oh, fuck, ooh, I wonder. And then you get older and older and older, and you seem to get less and less weird. Success. We've seen kind of this idea before, which is success is never really a straight line. It's a lot of ups and downs and forwards and backwards. I mean, you could describe that as a teenager right there, right? It's just like just a complete mess. I'm probably still in the middle of that thing. I don't know what that straight line bit over there is yet. I haven't quite found that yet, but apparently, yeah, I think that's literally your heartbeat. It's you flatline. Success! I've made it! But I'm going to talk to you, apparently I'm an expert on what it takes to become successful, because I've had a lot of luck in my life, and I've had a lot of amazing people around me who's helped me on my journey. And so today I'm telling to you my 3-point program on how to become successful. Actually, no, these 3 points are free. If you want the rest of the program, which is actually where the real insight comes, that's a small subscription of thousands of dollars a month. So I'm going to talk today about opportunity, actually computers, bicycles, and 1980s stories about time machines. First of all, opportunity. So opportunity for me was, being a kid in the 80s, was growing up around technology. And we've heard a few speakers talk about their childhood experiences with technology. And for me, it was the Sega SC3000. And if you think, put your hand up if you were a child of the 80s. Oh, so quite a few, right? And if you remember back in the 80s, technology back then was basically VCRs, digital watches, and electric windows on cars. And that was pretty much it. And then personal computers started turning up. But if you think about it, this is why I love this quote by Douglas Adams. It's like technology is really the stuff that we haven't quite figured out how it's going to work yet. So VCRs were basically shitty Netflix. The whole car is electric now, and digital watches are basically smart watches. And so it's taken us quite a while to figure out how to apply that technology and make it useful. But for me, it was really discovering this thing, a Sega SC3000. So one day, Mum brought it home. Me and my brothers had been playing on a ZX Spectrum at a friend's house. And so back in the 80s, these things were, they were kind of considered toys. You put cartridges in them, you could play Donkey Kong and Lode Runner and all sorts of other cool games. But if you had a unit like this with a keyboard, they transformed into this device where you could create things. You could actually turn what was a relatively dumb CRT TV screen and make it interactive. You could actually control what went on the screen. You could write, even if it was just to say, hello world, right? You could write code that could command the television to do things. So it was quite, we now know, transformative. But back in the 80s, they were still considered, it's like, oh, computers, these are like things you play games on. What was actually also remarkable was, even though I'm now a middle-aged white guy, so I have all the privilege that comes with that, I actually came from a family raised by a solo mum who was in a chair and was on a benefit. And it was quite remarkable for her to bring home that computer because, they cost the same price as a car. But she took out a second mortgage on the home, bought that computer and brought it home because she thought there was something in there. She could see how me and my brothers, our eyes lit up and we were just, captivated by this device. And she had a hunch that maybe they were going to change the world. And it wasn't just the Sega, then it was upgraded to a C64, and then a PC, and then 2 PCs, and then we networked the PCs, and then basically we had a house full of computers. And so I was very privileged in that I grew up surrounded by technology. And the technology was just there, and I could tinker with it, and play with it and go, I wonder if it could do this. And so that, I think, was one of the most transformational experiences that I was lucky to have. And we were talking about teenagers, and so as I grew older, so the computers were just there, and I think I was an average engineer, still am, if I could even consider myself still an engineer. But I was also interested in photography, and I was like mad keen on photography. If you'd asked me when I was 16 what I was going to be when I was going to grow up, I was going to become a photographer. That was absolutely my life plan. But having this device around, it made me question that decision. And in fact, I make it sound like it was like this conscious thing. It actually in reality involved dropping out of school twice, going to university, dropping out of university twice, doing fine arts, doing computer sciences. And I couldn't really figure out which was the path that I wanted to follow. And today, sometimes I think I wish I'd done the photography path, because that was probably where my passion was. But I was also really excited about the prospect of what a computer could do. And this was my dream, right? I had a dream to build a software company, because I read about all these software companies that were now starting to pop up, in the 80s and the 90s, and they were selling for big amounts of money, and that was it. It was like, that's what I want to do. I want to build a software company, and I want to sell it for a ridiculous amount of money. And so that got me going on that wiggle. I had my first job, which was the actually only job I've ever had, and then I started my own businesses, and I counted it up this morning. I actually started 6 businesses. 4 I don't talk about anymore. 2 were a mild success. 1 that I'd consider a startup that actually crashed and burned. And then about 13 years ago, had the idea for Vend, which then 30 years later, the overnight success, 30-year journey, got to exit Vend. And it made me wonder, it's like, well, what if I'd followed the photography path? And the reason why I picked the computer path is because this is what I had figured out would probably happen. It's like, I was a good photographer, but so were a million other people. But I didn't know a lot of people who were good at computers. And I didn't see a lot of application for what you would use computers and technology for. And like my mum, I had a hunch that maybe there was going to be better opportunity in a space where there aren't as many people. You can be an average engineer in a space where there are few engineers and be very successful, or you could be a good photographer in a space where there's a million photographers and be mediocre. So that's tip number 1. Find the space that nobody else is really looking at. We've heard about AI and other technologies today, and to me, they feel very similar. It's kind of like, they feel like in the gimmick bit, it's like, are they a toy? Are they a gimmick? Is there going to be a real application? Of course there is. We just haven't quite figured it out yet. Next, perseverance. We should all do things that scare the shit out of ourselves. I hate public speaking, and I'm absolutely terrified right now. But about 13 years ago, actually no, it was about 15 years ago, I started doing a thing. I realized I had started this habit of quitting things. So first I quit watching rugby. I thought I had a bit of a problem because I watched every single game of rugby that I could possibly consume, almost 24/7 if the lack of sleep would allow me. And I thought I'd developed an unhealthy relationship with rugby. So I just eased off the rugby for a bit and decided I'd quit watching rugby for a whole year. And as a New Zealander, you can imagine, like, whoa, what the fuck's going on there, bro? But just going through that exercise made me curious. It's like, well, what are the other things I could remove from my life that I feel aren't good for me? So I stopped drinking for a while. I quit smoking for good. I stopped eating meat. And I stopped reading the newspaper. Not all consecutively. These were just things I did. Every year I picked a new thing. I was like, well, I'm going to try doing less and less of this. And I found all of these things made my life richer. And then I started thinking about, well, actually I was talking to people as I went through this journey, and people would say, oh, you did that? You quit smoking or drinking or whatever? That's impossible, I could never do that. And it made me realize, it's like, there was this pattern and this thought pattern that a lot of people had. And it reminded me of a movie once where people would often misuse the word, and I don't really think that it means what they thought it meant. And so then I started to up it. And so one year I decided, instead of quitting things and removing things out of my life, I'll try adding new things into my life. So I started cycling. I hadn't been on a bike since I was probably 16. And at the time I was probably in mid-30s, and I'd been working in IT for a very long time. But I thought, I need to change my life. I need to lose some weight. I know how to ride a bike. Hadn't ridden one for a good 20-something years, but the good thing about riding a bike, it's just like riding a bike. And so I got on a bike and I found some hills, and I rode up hills, vomited into bushes, and then kept riding up hills until I didn't vomit into bushes, and then went on the bike and decided I'd cycle for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day. And then I decided that, fuck this, I'm going to cycle the length of New Zealand. So I took the bike down to Invercargill, and then to Bluff, and then the ferry to Stewart Island, and then I got on the bike, rode around Stewart Island for a little bit because there's not many roads there, and then got back on the ferry, and then started my way all the way up to Cape Reinga. And it took me about 6 weeks to cycle the length of New Zealand, and it was one of the most life-changing experiences. I lost about 30 kgs on the journey. And as far as I know, a lot of people have cycled the length of New Zealand. That's not doing impossible, like people have done that countless times. But as far as I know, I'm the first person, if not the only person, because people talk about riding from Cape Reinga to Bluff. So, first of all, I did Stewart Island. So, second of all, I started at the bottom and went the way up, and I can tell you it's much harder doing it uphill. Another year I decided I was going to run 1,000 kilometres, and not all at the same time. So I basically broke it down, right? I was like, well, I'm going to run 1,000 kilometres. How would I do that? There's 365 days in the year, so that's roughly about 3 kilometres a day. And so that's what I did. 1st of January, I got up, went for a run. Didn't vomit in a bush, which was good. And then the next day I got up, went for another 3K run. And I just kept doing that. Now, put up your hand if you are a runner. I'm doing this the wrong way around, actually. I should do it the other order. Put up your hand if you think you could run 3 kilometres. Yeah, that's like a large proportion of the room. We can all do that. But the trick to this is actually doing it every day. And then if you miss a day, you have to run 6 kilometres. Put up your hand if you think you could run 6 kilometres. Miss 2 days, miss 3 days, miss 4 days. Suddenly you're running marathons every week just to catch up with this fucked up running schedule that you thought would be a brilliant idea. So that was my life for a year, and I actually ran 5 half marathons that year. That wasn't on the plan, but I had to do it. One year I decided that I would learn to sing, and I would sing in front of an audience of at least 100 people who have paid to come and listen to me sing. That was by far the most terrifying experience. And if you think that was terrifying, I had the brilliant idea the week before the gig, which was if you bought a ticket, you could pick a song. Or you could vote for the playlist, and so that gave me the set list of songs I had to sing, and if you paid extra, you got to pick the song. And I didn't actually know what I was going to be singing until 48 hours before the gig. But as you can imagine, it was hilarious, and it was good fun, and we raised a lot of money for a charity. Another year, I decided to up the cycling thing. I decided instead of cycling New Zealand, I was going to cycle the world. Yeah. But I'm also lazy, so I decided that I was going to cycle around the world in 80 days. So I'm going to time box it, because I'm not going to let this thing drag on. And I figured out if I was going to do it in 80 days, there was one route that would allow me to do that, which was basically to pick the 40th latitude around the southern hemisphere, which means you have to cycle across the bottom narrow bit of Africa, the wide bit of Tasmania, the actual fat bit of New Zealand, from Raglan to East Cape, and then South America, going from Chile over the Andes into Buenos Aires. And that was awesome. And I was like, I knew I'd probably do this because I'd ridden New Zealand, but I didn't actually appreciate how hilly the rest of the fucking world was, especially on that latitude. And the one thing that was that really terrified me was the thought of having to cycle over the Andes, because those mountains are high. And like, I'd done a lot of cycling, but never really anything. I had never ridden up a mountain before. And that was towards the end of the trip. And I remember thinking, I was both terrified of it, but also really looking forward to it, because I'd been studying the elevation charts for like months, because you get to know personally every hill that you're about to ride over. And the Andes all the way up 3,000 meters or whatever it was, and then it's like downhill. And then the cool thing is about going from the Andes to Buenos Aires is it's literally downhill the whole way. It's like there's a really steep downhill bit, and then it's like this very almost inconceivable like little bit of downhill all the way into Buenos Aires. So I thought that would be the icing on the cake of the trip. As long as I get through all the hills, get up the mountain, then it's just downhill. And then the last week would be just whee all the way into Buenos Aires. I didn't factor in the prevailing wind goes the opposite direction. And so it was actually the hardest week of the entire trip. As I mentioned, one of my big ideas was to start a software venture. And so I started Vend 13 years ago. But back then the idea was really to start a $100 million software venture. So I guess I overachieved on that a little bit. But it was also, if you remember 13 years ago, we were kind of in a similar economic environment we're in now. It was like, there was a major financial impact that was hitting everybody. Everybody was trying to figure out, a lot of people were laying people off. In fact, I got laid off, which is how I had all the spare time to think of doing a new startup and ride bikes around New Zealand. And actually, it was while cycling New Zealand, I had the idea of doing Vend, and I had built a bit of a prototype. I'd done some screenshots. I had them in my bike bags. And as I rode around New Zealand, I caught up with other people in the tech ecosystem, and I tricked them. I said, hey, I'm cycling into your town. Do you want to come for a bike ride? And I was surprised that a lot of people in the ecosystem said yes, because first of all, it was like, who's this crazy motherfucker who's riding the length of New Zealand? I got to see this. And so they would join me sometimes just for an hour or sometimes for a whole day. But whilst we were on the bike, then I'd pull out my mocks, and I did the pitch. And it's like, hey, I've got this new idea. It's like, I'm going to build this cloud-based retail point of sale. And the cool thing was that they couldn't really turn around and ride the other direction because they would look like complete dicks. So they had to tolerate me for at least an hour. The other thing that happened shortly after launching Vend was my mum passed away. And so, as you could tell, my mum was a fairly important figure in my life. She was this amazing person who had lived in her whole life doing impossible things, which was where I realized I kind of got this habit of doing impossible things. Like, she literally every day was like an impossible challenge for her in many ways. And one of the reasons why I started Vend was because I really wanted to demonstrate to Mum that, that gesture 30 years ago, how impactful that was in my life. Like, how growing up around technology enabled me and my two brothers, we've all had very successful careers in IT, how impactful that would be. But she passed away suddenly the year I launched Vend, and so she never got to see how successful that was becoming. Oh, that's a real downer. I get to this bit, and it's like, I'm supposed to be uplifting everybody, and now I'm telling you this shit story about how my mum died. But just pause on that thought for a minute, because it's hopefully going to have a little bit more resonance. I just want to pause and just make this point, is that impossible is really just a series of smaller steps that just they may seem unremarkable, but you add them all up, and all of a sudden you're doing an impossible thing, whether it's running those 3 kilometers every day, it's getting on the bike again, just going for another day, or if it's getting up, getting yourself out of bed and getting your 3 teenage sons to school. These are all small, unremarkable steps, but the perseverance bit is the thing that links them all together and makes impossible things happen. The third story I want to talk about is belief, or stories about time machines. So a few years ago, I picked up a short story by Ray Bradbury and called The Toynbee Convictor, if anybody's read that. No, literally, like nobody's read it. And it's a fairly short story. And it's about the future. And I realized, probably as I was getting a bit older, this thing where as we start to think about technology in the future, quite often we catastrophize it. We think about how technology is actually not making things better, how social media is ruining our lives, and AI is going to make us all unemployed, and robots are going to come and kill us, and all these things. And it made me remember reading this book. So I'm going to spoil the book for you now, because none of you have read it. You don't need to read it, because I'm going to tell you the ending of the book. But anyway, so it's about this guy who invents this time machine. And the book is actually set in the 80s. And the other thing we forget about the 80s, like I think we have one of these funny relationships with memory. We think of the 80s and it's all fluoro and partying and good times. But actually the 80s was pretty shit. Like all the whales were dying. We had this massive hole in the ozone layer that everybody thought was going to kill us all. We were on the verge of, felt like, World War III every day, that nuclear bombs were going to destroy everything. And we had another fucking global financial meltdown in the 80s. And anyway, so this guy, I can't remember his name, the time machine guy, it's not important. He invents the time machine and he goes, all right, I'm going to go 100 years into the future and see how this all plays out. And so he goes forward to what would be, I guess, 2180 something. And he comes back and he brings back photographs and videos of like whales. It's like, hey, the whales are still alive, and and amazing cities and flying cars and all these amazing things that was happening in the world in the year 2184. And he brought them back and showed everybody, and everybody was like, whoa, okay, cool. Things work out okay. Anyway, the story then fast forwards to 100 years into the future. And he only used the time machine once, and then he destroyed it because he thought it was a technology too powerful, and he didn't want people to do nefarious things with it. And so then the story fast forwards to that day in 2184, where he will appear in the future in his time machine. And he's still alive because medical technology has meant that you can live to 120, 30 years old. And he's never given an interview, and he decides to grant one interview to a young journalist who comes to his home and interviews him. And you can imagine what the first question is that they're going to ask him. It's like, how did you do it? And he said, I didn't. I made the whole thing up. I fabricated all the videos and the photographs, but I wanted to give people the hope. If you give people the hope and the belief that the future is going to be amazing, then they'll relax about it and they'll go and make it happen. Because they believe that that is the future that they want to live in. And I really like that story. The spoiler end bit is he then kills himself. And he gives all the evidence to the journalist and leaves it as the journalist with the conundrum of like, do I like out this guy as a fraud, or do I just like destroy all the evidence and let everybody go living in nirvana? He does the latter. But that got me thinking about what we can do. Like, especially feels very timely at the moment as we look around what's happening around the world. It's like, how do we bring that hope back and that belief back? Because I feel like we're kind of in the 80s again. Everything always goes in a big cycle. And the innovators are going to be the 8-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, the teenagers of today. How do we get them to become the innovators? And it's not about computers, because that would be obvious, and it'd be, oh, we figured this one out. We just give them the computers. They're surrounded by computers. They've probably got 5 computers that they have ready access to, 1 million times more powerful than the computers that we had in the 80s. So what is it? And what we figured out is, so we've been running a charity called the Pam Fergusson Charitable Trust in my mum's name to try and recreate that gesture. It's like, how do we give the computers, what are the computers today that will be life-changing devices and technologies of kids? And maybe it's robots, maybe it's 3D printers, Maybe it's CRISPR. Maybe, who knows? You know, there's a lot of these technologies, AI, that we just don't really know how it's going to play out. But I can tell you, if you empower the young kids, the next generation, and give them those three things, the opportunity, sounds easy, right? Give computers to kids and teach them how to program robots and they'll figure it out. Absolutely, we've been doing it for 9 years. That's not the problem. The problem is, how do you create opportunities for every kid? You know, how do you inspire a kid? Teach them. I can teach any kid how to program a robot in half an hour. But that's not the problem, because then the kids go home and they're like, Mum, I want to be a roboticist and program robots. But then if they don't have a robot, how are they going to fulfill that dream? And so that's what we've been doing over the last 9 years, is we've been developing programs, working with kids. We've heard people say this already. It's like, coding? Yeah, anybody can learn how to code. I guarantee I've never met a kid who I haven't been able to teach how to code. But coding's important so they actually understand how the machine works. But the more important skill is the innovation, is the creativity, is the wondering. It's like, well, how do I solve a problem? What's a big, gnarly problem that the world needs solved, and how do I solve it? And then giving them the belief that they can do it. You know, how do you give them the opportunity? So if they need to get access to a CRISPR lab, I'm not sure that's a great idea, letting teenagers into a CRISPR lab. But you know, how do you create these pathways? How do you give them the mentors that they need? Because you know, we've seen this quickly line, and if you've got teenagers, you know that they're all fucking mad in the head. You know, they need the safety rails around them of people who have been there, done that. Like, we may not have the new ideas, but we can share our knowledge and we can help them on their journey. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 9 years. And the latest endeavor, 5 years ago, we thought it'd be a great idea to buy a school camp. Totally right. Who hasn't woken up one day and thought, I want to own a school camp? But anyway, we used to go to Raglan a lot out on holiday, and actually I don't have the time to tell you the story because it's just too weird. But anyway, decided one day that there was a school camp for sale and we'd buy it. And then we would turn it into an innovation place for kids to come and learn about how to change the world. And so we give the focus of like the natural world, of like, because these are actually the problems that the world needs solving most. I'm not a tree-hugging hippie, although I have learned to love trees. But if you think about it, the problems that the world needs solved are, how do we get access to good food? How do we get clean energy? How do we protect our biodiversity? So there's like, everything seems to stem from how do we look after the natural environment and innovate? And as a place, you know, coming from a place like New Zealand, where it just feels like it's always been in our DNA, is to look after the place. And so that's the point I'm going to end on, is like, believe in something so important that it inspires the rest of us. We may now be sort of old and surly and be like, so you grow up as a kid thinking everything's impossible, and it's like, wow, and then eventually you realize that you're the old man yelling at clouds. So it's probably not going to be us who's going to do it, right? The innovators of the world are definitely the next generation. So how do we empower them, support them, and just open the doors to let them do it? And I'm pretty sure they're going to change the world. Thanks.
Don't go anywhere. Stay right there. Sit down. We've got time. We're going to make time. There's questions. This is one of the most important questions that you'll ever get asked. I'm just warning you now.
Okay.
Where did your boots come from?
How many people ask that one?
I'm sure you know it. So 4 votes there, and then there's another one that says love the shoes. What are you preparing for? Are you going to go bush for a year?
Well, I literally came from the camp this morning. I left Raglan at 6 a.m. to be here. But these are the Beeline, the Timberlands, limited edition. I'm not sure if you can buy them anymore. If I wasn't at the camp, I'd be here in yellow Crocs. So you probably, this is probably an upgrade.
We're thankful you've worn those shoes today. second most important question, are you going to sing us a little bit of the song?
No, I've
You've hung up your singing.
I don't think I had
vocal
a singing
cords.
thing.
What-
I've terrified 100 people. I'm not going to terrify another 700.
700.
Yeah.
What was the top rated song at your gig?
It was actually "I Will Survive." Yeah.
Gloria Gaynor.
Yeah.
Boom. I love that. I really want him to do it now. Can we bully pressure you into doing it? No. I know we can't because you're weird. All right. Serious questions now. What would your top 2 to 3 lessons learned from all the startups that you've done over your career, and how did you approach Vend differently if you did?
Well, you're not paying attention. I just told you the three. No. Unfortunately, in working with a lot of entrepreneurs and being around the traps for a while, the number one thing is timing, and it's unfortunately something that you can't control. If you have an idea, and the world's not ready for it, then you just need to be patient. But you can be in control of it in a sense, is that you need to be ready to go on your idea when the world is ready. So you either need to convince the world that it's important, or you need to have the perseverance to stick it out until the world's ready, until the timing is right for that idea. Yeah. But unfortunately, in startup land, time is the thing that kills most ideas, is because you run out of money. So sorry, there's no easy answer to that
I
one.
know, you didn't even answer it. I know that.
And there's only one answer. The other two things would be money and I don't know, seriously though, probably the most important thing is having a really good support network of people around you. Whether they're old high school friends or just the people that you can have safe spaces where you can talk about how shit everything is going, and how everything just feels like you're on one of those precipices where you're about to fall off the edge and everything's going to go horribly wrong. There'll literally be hundreds of those moments. Make sure you've got people around who are those safe people that you can talk. They don't need to give you the answers. Sometimes it's just needing to be heard. Yeah.
Nice, great advice. People here love threes. That's another top 3 question. What are the 3 most important technologies to introduce kids to? Do you think?
Believe it or not, I've become the angry man who shouts at clouds. I spent my whole career being a technologist, and now I honestly don't care. It's I used to geek out on technology, and now I'm not so interested. It's not that I don't care, it's just that I think I'm probably too stupid now to figure it out. The kids are going to surprise you. They're going to come up with the ideas. It's me telling them that they need to learn programming or do this or this. It's not about that. It's about them creating the space where they can go and find the thing that's going to be the thing that's going to change the world. Yeah.
I'm going to reframe it then a little bit. What are those kind of 3 skills or characteristics that we could try and instill in our kids?
Resilience.
Yep.
It's okay to fail, right? And actually having lots of little micro failures, and actually acknowledging them as failures, or you can give it another word, they can be lessons, but trying something and it not working out is actually okay. It's not the end of the world, because you would have learnt a shit ton of stuff as you went. So having the resilience to be able to pick yourself up and go, that didn't work, I'll try something different. Having those, we can all probably name that person who was when we were teenagers, who just took that little bit of extra interest in us, or whether it was in your first job and they kind of decided to take you under their wing and help you. It's making sure that, because a lot of kids in our communities don't have those people. It's not because of a lack of love and affection and care in their communities. It's if a kid wants to grow up to be a roboticist and there isn't a roboticist in their community, how are they going? It's really hard for them to connect with a mentor who's going to be able to help them, because they just don't have those people living in their worlds. So that would be the second thing. And then the third thing is patience. We put so much pressure on ourselves as well, which is to go for be the next overnight success, and But the reality is like the pathway to success is at least a 10-year journey, right? Like I started my journey when I was 8 years old, right? And it took me 40 something years to get there. It depends on what your definition of success is. So don't put pressure on people to like have to knock it out of the park. Like there's been a lot of talk about how to foster a vibrant startup ecosystem. And the answer is to foster a vibrant fucking ecosystem. It's just like, just do it. It's like, because like, you know, there's not one thing. It's not like, go to this incubator and you'll learn everything you need to know, or you know, go work at Xero and you'll learn everything you need to know, or you know, da-da-da. It's like we need to get kids to learn the skills that are the important skills for them to next master in order for them to do the thing that they really, really want to do. Like there probably isn't a university course or program for exactly what they want to do. Because like in 20 years' time, we have no idea what the jobs are going to be. So how are we going to create the programs for kids to go and learn how to do it?
Love it. Perseverance, resilience, resilience, and access to people.
Access to people.
Access to people. Love it. How did you find time to juggle a successful startup while pursuing your goals of biking around the world and other such year-long quitting journeys?
I've had a lot of failures, and so I've had a lot of time on my hands. So it's usually in between
one
things.
or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And in terms of what advice could you give people around stopping something in your life? Like you've stopped a lot of things, and it can be, you know, there's another comment in here somewhere around, I can't imagine being able to quit news, like, because it's important. What made it easy to stop doing something? Was it just your determination, or?
Yeah, I think we all have our own unique weirdness. You know, we're all on a spectrum of diversity of thought. So like figure out how you think. So for me, I realized that if somebody said I couldn't do something, then I'd be like, fuck you. So I had to find that person. And sometimes they were literal, and sometimes they were like hypothetical, that, you know, that voice was like, you're not going to do it. You're not going to be able to do that. And I'd be like, fuck you, I am going to do that. And so that's what I discovered was how I did it. And also by setting an audacious goal, like running 1,000 kilometers. Like if I'd set the goal, it's like, I need to start running. It's like, well, yeah, I could probably do that. And I'd run a bit and be like, yay. But you know, you set the goal to run 1,000 kilometers, and then suddenly it's like, oh shit, okay, well, I've got to break it down. I've got to I'm committing to this. And the other thing I learned about myself was like, I would share all these goals publicly. And so then you had the shame of social pressure. It was like, if you didn't do it, yeah.
What have you currently got on the stop list? Is there anything?
Nothing really on the stop list. I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of my phone.
Just get rid of it.
I
it's
know.
Easy.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, one of the ideas I had was to live like it was the year 2000, and so I wouldn't be able to use any technology if it was invented after the year 2000. I thought that would be quite interesting.
I'll tell you what else is interesting. My son and I, we have 80s night twice a week, which is tech-free. Tech-free nights, Tuesdays and Thursdays, no phones, no. If you need Spotify to play music, nah.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
But we just did it.
Yeah.
We didn't need to come up with a plan. Just go, it's tech-free night. And he goes, what are we going to talk about? And I'm like, whatever you want. And he's like, nothing. And I'm like, okay, we'll play a board game.
Well, that was one of the things we loved about the school camp in Raglan, is that there's no cell phone reception, and we could turn the Wi-Fi off. And so, you know, we could bring kids there, and they would all come off the bus with their devices, but then, very quickly, once their devices stopped working. Well, they still worked, but they meant their attention shifted. And we teach them how to use their device in more creative ways. So if they can't get on the net, what's inside a phone? A lot of kids aren't even allowed to obviously for good reasons, to take their phone apart.
Yeah.
You know, and so we have old technology. We're not so old technology, as in like it's no longer being used, but like iPhones and things. And actually, it's one of the most popular exercises that kids love to do at our workshops is to take shit apart, and it's amazing. And we get them to take stuff apart, and then we tell them they have to put it back together, and they freak out.
With a few bits left over.
But we say, okay, well, no, you don't have to make an iPhone again. What would you use the parts, and what would you invent? And it's amazing. It's amazing what they come up with.
Yeah. They are the future. Thank you so much for that talk. We're out of time. I could sit on the couch with you all afternoon, to be fair, but I can't. Our time is up. Thank you so much. Please give a warm welcome, a round of applause for Vaughan. I love it. Has anyone had their mind changed about embracing their weirdness? Thanks to Vaughan. People are nodding. That's good.